The rushing waters of the Oconaluftee River had never sounded so violent, so hungry. Dr. Sarah Mitchell pressed her back against the wet boulder, her hiking boots struggling for purchase on the slippery rocks as the current surged around her ankles. 20 feet ahead, a small figure thrashed desperately in the churning rapids, dark hair disappearing and reappearing above the foam-capped waves. "Hold on!" she screamed over the roar of the water, though she knew the child couldn't hear her. Without hesitation, Sarah plunged into the torrent, the icy mountain water shocking her system as it pulled at her clothes, her breath, her very will to move forward. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a pediatric surgeon from Boston, came to be fighting for her life in a Cherokee reservation river, we need to go back 3 days earlier to a hospital room where everything began to unravel. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had always believed that saving children was her calling, her purpose, the one thing that gave meaning to her carefully ordered existence. At 34, she was one of Boston Children's Hospital's most respected pediatric surgeons, known for her steady hands and unwavering dedication. Her colleagues called her brilliant. Her patients' families called her a miracle worker, but on this particular Tuesday morning in October, as she stood outside room 314, Sarah felt like anything but a miracle worker. The chart in her hands told a story she'd read too many times before. Emma Rodriguez, age 7, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, stage 4. The little girl had been fighting for 18 months, enduring chemotherapy treatments that left her tiny body ravaged and weak. Sarah had performed 3 surgeries to remove tumors, each time hoping it would be the last, each time watching as new shadows appeared on the X-rays. Through the window, she could see Emma's mother, Maria, sitting beside the hospital bed, stroking her daughter's bald head with infinite tenderness. Maria Rodriguez worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and watching other people's children during the day, all to pay for treatments that insurance covered only partially. She'd sold her car, moved in with her sister, and borrowed against a house she'd spent 15 years trying to own. Now even that wasn't enough. Sarah knocked softly before entering, her white coat rustling in the sterile silence. "Good morning, Emma," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "How are we feeling today?" Emma turned toward her with eyes that seemed far too old for her 7-year-old face. The chemotherapy had stolen her hair, her appetite, and much of her energy, but it hadn't dimmed the intelligence that sparkled in her dark eyes. "Dr. Sarah," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed just yesterday. "Mama says you have news." Sarah glanced at Maria, seeing the hope and fear warring in the woman's expression. They'd had this conversation before, about experimental treatments, about clinical trials, about options that existed somewhere beyond their financial reach. Today's conversation would be different, and somehow that made it infinitely harder. "I do have news," Sarah said, pulling up a chair so she could sit at Emma's eye level. "There's a new treatment protocol at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. It's showing remarkable results for patients with your specific type of leukemia." Emma's eyes lit up, but Maria's expression remained guarded. She'd learned not to get excited until she heard all the details, especially the ones involving money. The treatment combines targeted immunotherapy with a new drug that specifically attacks the cancer cells while leaving healthy tissue alone, Sarah continued. "In the initial trials, they're seeing an 85% remission rate." 85%, Maria breathed, reaching for her daughter's hand. That's wonderful. When can we start?" This was the part Sarah had been dreading. She'd spent the last week on the phone with insurance companies, patient advocacy groups, and pharmaceutical companies, trying to find a way to make the impossible possible. The results had been uniformly disappointing. The treatment costs $400,000, Sarah said quietly. Your insurance will cover about 60% if we can get approval, but the remaining $160,000 would need to be paid up front before they'll begin the protocol. The silence that followed felt crushing. Sarah watched the hope drain from Maria's face, replaced by the familiar look of defeat she'd seen too many times in this job. $160,000 might as well have been $16 million for a woman who'd already bankrupted herself trying to save her child. There has to be another way, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. A payment plan or something. I'll work 3 jobs. Mama, Emma interrupted, her small hand covering her mother's. It's okay. But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. Sarah had gone into pediatric medicine because she believed every child deserved a chance at life, regardless of their family's ability to pay. The reality of American healthcare had been a brutal awakening, but cases like Emma's still cut deep. I'm going to keep looking for options, Sarah said, though they all knew she'd already exhausted every possibility. There are foundations, grants, fundraising options. How long do we have to decide? Maria asked. Sarah consulted the chart, though she already knew the answer. The Philadelphia team needs a decision by next Friday. If Emma is going to be accepted into this trial, we need to move quickly. Her blood work shows the current treatment isn't holding the cancer back anymore. The weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Emma was running out of time, and they all knew it. Without this experimental treatment, Sarah estimated the little girl had perhaps 6 months left. With it, she could have a lifetime. After leaving Emma's room, Sarah found herself in the hospital chapel, a small, non-denominational space where she often came when cases felt hopeless. She wasn't particularly religious, but something about the quiet helped her think. Today, however, thinking only made everything worse. Her phone buzzed with a text from her ex-husband, David. Divorce papers are ready for your signature. Lawyer needs them by Thursday. Sarah stared at the message, feeling the last pieces of her carefully constructed life crumbling around her. David had filed for divorce 6 months earlier, claiming she was married to her job and had no room in her life for an actual relationship. He wasn't wrong. Sarah had missed dinners, anniversaries, and countless weekends because a child needed surgery or a family needed her support. She'd chosen her patience over her personal life so many times that eventually David stopped asking her to choose him. Now, at 34, she was facing the prospect of being alone in a city where she had no family, no close friends outside of work, and no idea what her life looked like beyond the walls of this hospital. The thought terrified her, almost as much as watching children like Emma slip away, despite all her skills and training. Her phone rang, interrupting her brooding. The caller ID showed her department head, Dr. Harrison Webb. "Sarah, I need to see you in my office," he said without preamble. Now, Dr. Webb's office overlooked the Charles River, its windows offering a view that Sarah had always found calming. Today, however, the sight of the water made her think of drowning, of being swept away by currents too strong to fight. "Sit down," Webb said, his expression unreadable. He was a man in his 60s who'd run the pediatric surgery department for nearly 2 decades. Sarah respected him enormously, which made what he said next even more devastating. "I'm suspending you from active surgery rotation, effective immediately." Sarah felt the words hit her like a physical blow. "What? Why?" Webb slid a folder across his desk. "The Rodriguez case. You've been calling insurance companies directly, arguing with their medical review boards, and yesterday you contacted the pharmaceutical company to demand they provide the drug at cost. The hospital administration received 3 complaints about a surgeon overstepping professional boundaries." "I was trying to save a child's life," Sarah said, her voice rising. "Emma Rodriguez is going to die without that treatment, and the only thing standing between her and survival is money? How is fighting for her overstepping boundaries? Because it's not your job to negotiate with insurance companies or drug manufacturers. We have patient advocates and social workers for that. Your job is to perform surgery and provide medical care. Sarah stood up, pacing to the window. Below, the river flowed steadily toward the harbor, indifferent to the human drama playing out in the offices above. So, I'm supposed to just watch her die? Tell a 7-year-old girl that she's out of options because her mother can't afford to save her. You're supposed to provide the best care possible within the constraints of the system we work in, Webb said firmly. I know it's frustrating, Sarah. We all feel it. But you can't save every child, and you can't bankrupt yourself, emotionally trying to fight battles you can't win. How long is the suspension? 2 weeks. Consider it a mandatory vacation. You've been working 70-hour weeks for the past 6 months. You need time to gain some perspective, maybe talk to someone about healthy professional boundaries. Sarah turned back to face him, seeing pity in his expression that made her feel even worse. And if I refuse? Then the suspension becomes permanent. The hospital board is already concerned about your emotional investment in cases. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. An hour later, Sarah sat in her car in the hospital parking garage, staring at the divorce papers David's lawyer had messengered over. Her signature was required in 3 places, officially ending 8 years of marriage to a man who'd once promised to support her dreams of saving children. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd dedicated her life to healing families, but couldn't save her own. She'd spent years fighting to give children futures, but had no idea what her own future looked like. And now, suspended from the only work that gave her life meaning, she felt more lost than she'd ever been. Her phone rang again. This time, it was her sister Jenny, calling from Seattle. "Hey, stranger," Jenny said, her voice carrying the forced cheerfulness Sarah recognized from their childhood. "I know you're probably elbow-deep in someone's chest cavity, but I wanted to check on you. David called yesterday." "He called you?" "He's worried about you. Says you've been working yourself into the ground, not eating, not sleeping. He thinks you might do something drastic." Sarah almost laughed. Drastic, like dedicating her life to saving children was somehow extreme. "I'm fine, Jen, just dealing with a difficult case." "When was the last time you took a vacation? A real one, not one of those medical conferences where you work the entire time." Sarah couldn't remember. In residency, she'd promised herself she'd travel once she finished training. Then she'd promised she'd take time off once she made attending. Then once she paid off her student loans, there had always been another goal, another sick child, another reason to postpone living her own life. "I'm taking some time off now, actually," she said, not mentioning that it wasn't exactly voluntary. "Really? That's fantastic. Where are you going?" Sarah looked around the parking garage at the concrete walls and fluorescent lights that had become as familiar as home. Where was she going? Back to her empty apartment to sign divorce papers and think about all the ways her life had gone wrong. "I'm not sure yet," she said honestly. "Well, whatever you do, get out of Boston. Go somewhere you've never been. Do something completely different. Remember when we were kids and you used to talk about hiking the Appalachian Trail? Maybe it's time to actually do it." After hanging up, Sarah sat in the silence of her car, thinking about her sister's words. The Appalachian Trail. She'd dreamed about it in medical school, during those brutal years when she'd barely seen sunlight. The idea of walking through mountains, of being surrounded by nothing but nature and her own thoughts, had seemed like the ultimate luxury. Now, with 2 weeks of forced vacation ahead of her and a life that felt like it was falling apart, the idea didn't seem luxurious. It seemed necessary. That night, Sarah spent hours researching hiking trails in the southern Appalachians. She wasn't ready for the full-through hike. that would take months she didn't have, but there were shorter sections that offered the solitude and challenge she craved. One trail in particular caught her attention, the Oconaluftee River Trail in the Great Smoky Mountains, which ran through Cherokee tribal lands in North Carolina. The description spoke of pristine wilderness, ancient forests, and the healing power of nature. It seemed like exactly what she needed, a place where she could escape the constant reminder of her failures, where she could find some clarity about what came next. Sarah booked a cabin rental near the trailhead for the following week. As she filled out the online forms, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: anticipation. For the first time in years, she was going somewhere with no agenda, no patients waiting, no lives hanging in the balance. She had no idea that in trying to escape one drowning child, she was about to encounter another. And this time, the child's survival would depend not on her surgical skills or the hospital's resources, but on her willingness to risk everything in waters that had claimed lives for generations. The Cherokee called the Oconaluftee the place, by the river, and for centuries it had been both a source of life and a keeper of secrets. Sarah Mitchell was about to discover that some secrets run deeper than water, and some rescues change not just the life being saved, but the life of the one doing the saving. As she packed her hiking gear that night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this trip would be different from anything she'd ever done. She was right, though not in any way she could have imagined. In 3 days, she would be fighting for her life in those ancient waters, and her actions would set in motion events that would transform her from a failed surgeon into something she'd never dreamed of becoming: a mother. Bound by laws older than the mountains themselves, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The rental cabin sat nestled among towering hemlocks at the edge of Cherokee tribal land, its weathered cedar siding blending seamlessly with the ancient forest that surrounded it. Sarah Mitchell stood on the narrow front porch, breathing in air so clean and crisp it made her Boston lungs ache with unfamiliarity. For the first time in months, she couldn't hear the constant hum of traffic, the beeping of medical equipment, or the urgent voices of hospital staff. The silence was profound, almost unsettling. She'd driven straight through from Boston, 13 hours of interstate highways and mountain curves that gradually peeled away the layers of her old life. Now, with her hiking pack leaning against the porch railing and the divorce papers tucked safely in her car's glove compartment, signed but not yet mailed, Sarah felt suspended between who she'd been and who she might become. The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace, handmade furniture that looked like it had been crafted by local artisans, and walls decorated with Cherokee pottery and weavings. A guest book on the kitchen table contained entries from previous visitors, their comments speaking of healing, renewal, and the transformative power of these ancient mountains. Found exactly what I was looking for without knowing what that was. Read one entry from a teacher from Atlanta. Another, from a retired veteran, simply said, "The mountains remember everything. They help me remember too." Sarah unpacked methodically, hanging her few civilian clothes in the cedar closet, arranging her toiletries in the rustic bathroom, and setting her hiking gear on the kitchen table. As she worked, she caught glimpses of herself in the mirror, a woman she barely recognized. Without her white coat and hospital ID badge, without the constant urgency that had defined her life for so many years, she looked younger somehow, but also lost. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Webb. "Hope you're getting some rest. The Rodriguez family asked about you today. I told them you were taking some well-deserved time off." Sarah stared at the message, feeling the familiar twist of guilt and helplessness. Emma was probably getting weaker while Sarah sat in a mountain cabin feeling sorry for herself. The experimental treatment deadline was still looming, and Maria Rodriguez was probably working extra shifts, desperately trying to raise money that might as well have been buried treasure. She turned the phone off and tossed it onto the couch. For the next week, she was just Sarah Mitchell, not Dr. Mitchell. No lives depended on her decisions. No families looked to her for miracles she couldn't provide. The thought should have been liberating, but instead it left her feeling hollow. That evening, she drove into the nearby town of Cherokee to stock up on supplies and get a feel for the area. The town straddled the boundary between the Cherokee Reservation and the National Park. Its main street a curious blend of authentic Native American culture and tourist-friendly attractions. Traditional craft shops selling handmade pottery and beadwork sat alongside gift stores peddling mass-produced souvenirs with Cherokee logos. Sarah stopped at a small grocery store owned by a Cherokee family, the River Songs, according to the hand-painted sign above the door. Inside, she found herself face to face with an elderly Cherokee woman whose silver hair was braided with colorful ribbons and whose dark eyes seemed to see more than they should. "You're the doctor from up north," the woman said without preamble. As Sarah approached the counter with her supplies, Sarah blinked in surprise. "How did you—" "Mrs. Patterson at the cabin rental mentioned you. Word travels fast in a small community." The woman extended a weathered hand. "I'm Rose Riversong. My family owns this store." "Sarah Mitchell," she replied, shaking Rose's hand and noting the surprising strength in her grip. "Though I'm trying not to be a doctor this week." Rose smiled, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something knowing in her expression. "Sometimes we don't get to choose when we stop being who we are. The mountains have a way of calling forth what's needed, whether we're ready or not." Something in the woman's tone made Sarah's skin prickle with unease. "I'm just here to do some hiking, clear my head." "Of course you are, dear, but be careful on the river trails. We've had more rain than usual this season, and the water's running high and fast. The Oconaluftee has taken 3 lives in the past decade, all experienced hikers who thought they understood the river's moods." Sarah thanked her for the warning and left the store, but Rose's words echoed in her mind as she drove back to the cabin. There had been something almost prophetic about the way the elderly woman had spoken, as if she knew something Sarah didn't. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect hiking weather. Sarah set out early, her pack loaded with water, trail food, and emergency supplies. The Oconaluftee River Trail was a moderate hike that followed the river for several miles through old-growth forest, offering solitude and spectacular scenery. The trail began gently, winding through groves of tulip poplars and oak trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn autumn colors. Sarah found her rhythm quickly, her body grateful for physical movement after months of standing in operating rooms and sitting in hospital chairs. The sound of rushing water grew louder as she approached the river, and soon she was walking alongside the Oconaluftee itself. The river was indeed running high, as Rose had warned. What should have been a gentle stream was a powerful torrent, its waters dark with runoff from recent rains. Sarah paused at several viewpoints, watching the water surge around boulders and fallen logs with frightening force. It was beautiful, but dangerous, like so many things in nature. 2 miles into the hike, she encountered her first Cherokee families on the trail. A group of adults and children were gathered near a traditional fishing spot, their voices carrying a mix of English and Cherokee language. The children laughed and played, while the adults worked with traditional fishing methods, their movements practiced and efficient. One of the children, a boy who couldn't have been more than 8, noticed Sarah watching and waved enthusiastically. His grandmother, a woman about Rose's age, nodded politely before saying something to the boy in Cherokee that made him return to the group. Sarah continued on, feeling like an outsider, observing a world she didn't understand. These families had been coming to this river for generations, their ancestors having fished these waters long before European settlers arrived. They understood the river's rhythms, its dangers, its gifts. She was just a tourist with expensive hiking gear and no real connection to this place. The thought made her feel even more lost than she had in Boston. At least there, she'd had a purpose, even if that purpose had been slowly destroying her personal life. Here she was nobody, not a doctor, not a wife, not even particularly experienced as a hiker. She was just a woman walking alone through someone else's homeland, trying to figure out what came next. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself drawn deeper into the wilderness. The marked trail eventually gave way to older, less maintained paths that seemed to follow deer runs and ancient Cherokee routes through the forest. She should have turned back, should have stuck to the established trails, but something compelled her forward. The river had carved a series of deep pools and rushing rapids through this section of the mountains, creating a landscape of stunning beauty and obvious danger. Sarah found herself standing at the edge of a particularly dramatic gorge, watching the water plunge over a series of rock ledges into a pool that looked deceptively calm. It was here that she first heard the voices. At first, she thought it was just the sound of the water, the way rushing streams can mimic human speech. But as she listened more carefully, she realized she was hearing actual conversation. Children's voices, speaking in Cherokee, coming from somewhere downstream. Sarah followed the sound, pushing through dense undergrowth until she reached a bend in the river where the gorge opened into a wider valley. Below her she could see a group of Cherokee children playing near the water's edge. They appeared to be unsupervised, though Sarah knew their parents were probably nearby, hidden by the thick forest. She was about to turn away, not wanting to intrude on their play, when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The children were playing increasingly close to a section of the river, where the current ran fast and deep, where fallen logs created dangerous obstacles that could trap someone underwater. One child in particular, a girl who looked to be about 6 years old, was wading further into the water than the others, her small form barely visible above the dark surface. Sarah watched with growing alarm as the girl moved closer to where the current would be strongest, her playmates apparently unaware of the danger. Every instinct Sarah had developed as a pediatric surgeon screamed at her to intervene. She'd seen too many children brought to emergency rooms after drowning accidents, had fought too many battles to save young lives that had been cut short by a moment's inattention near water. But she also knew she was an outsider here, a white woman on Cherokee land, interfering with children whose families might not welcome her intervention. The cultural complexities of the situation warred with her medical training and protective instincts. The decision was made for her when the little girl suddenly slipped, disappearing beneath the dark water with barely a splash. For a moment that felt like an eternity. Sarah stood frozen at the top of the gorge, watching the spot where the child had vanished. The other children continued playing, apparently unaware that their friend was no longer among them. The river flowed on, indifferent to the small life it had claimed. Then Sarah was moving, scrambling down the steep bank with no regard for her own safety, her hiking boots sliding on wet leaves and loose rocks. She could hear her own voice shouting warnings to the other children, calls for help that she knew were too far from any adults to be heard. By the time she reached the water's edge, precious seconds had passed. The little girl had been swept downstream by the current, her small form occasionally visible as she fought to keep her head above water. The other children had finally realized what had happened and were screaming in Cherokee, their voices high. With panic, Sarah kicked off her boots and plunged into the river without hesitation. The cold water hit her like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs and immediately numbing her extremities. The current was stronger than she'd expected, trying to sweep her downstream toward the same dangerous obstacles that threatened. The child, Fighting against the flow, Sarah swam with desperate determination toward where she'd last seen the girl. Her muscles, soft from months of hospital work, burned with the effort. Her civilian clothes became waterlogged weights that dragged at her movements. But her medical training took over, calculating angles and trajectories, predicting where a small body would likely surface in this type of current. She found the child wedged against a fallen log, unconscious and frighteningly still. Sarah grabbed the girl's limp form and began the desperate struggle back toward shore, fighting not just the current, but also the clock that was ticking in her head, the crucial minutes that determined whether brain damage would occur, whether a rescue would become a recovery of a body. The other children had run to get help, their voices echoing through the forest as they called for adults in Cherokee. But Sarah knew help might come too late. Everything depended on what happened in the next few minutes, in the space between life and death, where she'd spent so much of her professional career. As she reached the rocky shore and pulled the unconscious child from the water, Sarah's mind shifted into the clinical detachment that had served her through countless emergencies. But this time, there was no team of nurses, no advanced equipment, no backup plans. There was only her knowledge, her training, and her desperate determination to save a life that had been entrusted to her by circumstances she never could have predicted. The little girl's lips were blue, her small chest still. Sarah tilted her head back, cleared her airway, and began the delicate process of breathing life back into a child whose name she didn't even know. Around her, the ancient forest seemed to hold its breath, as if the mountains themselves were watching to see whether this stranger would prove worthy of the trust that had been placed in her hands. In that moment, Sarah Mitchell faced a choice that would define not just the child's future, but her own. She could continue the careful, measured approach that had characterized her medical career. Wait for help, follow protocols, protect herself from liability, or she could pour everything she had into saving this one small life, regardless of the consequences to herself. The choice, when it came, felt like no choice at all. The first breath came as a violent cough that expelled river water from the little girl's lungs, followed by a cry so sharp and desperate it seemed to echo off the canyon walls. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned the child onto her side, supporting her small body while she continued to expel water and draw precious air back into her lungs. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah whispered in English, then wished desperately that she knew the Cherokee words for comfort. "You're safe now. You're going to be okay." The girl's dark eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alive, and Sarah felt the familiar rush of relief and exhaustion that followed every successful resuscitation. But this time was different. This wasn't a sterile operating room with a team of professionals and cutting-edge equipment. This was a riverbank in the Cherokee wilderness, and she was soaked to the skin, holding a child whose family she'd never met. The sound of crashing footsteps through the underbrush announced the arrival of the other children, now accompanied by several Cherokee adults whose faces showed the particular terror of parents who'd nearly lost a child. The first to reach them was a woman in her 30s with long black hair and traditional beadwork on her denim jacket. She dropped to her knees beside Sarah and the girl, speaking rapidly in Cherokee while her hands moved to check her daughter's condition. Will she be?" The woman started in accented English, then switched back to Cherokee as emotion overwhelmed her ability to translate. "She's going to be fine," Sarah said firmly, though she continued to monitor the child's breathing and color. She was underwater for maybe 90 seconds, possibly less. No signs of significant oxygen deprivation. Her reflexes are good, pupils are reactive, but she should be checked by a doctor to be absolutely sure there's no secondary drowning or other complications. The woman looked at Sarah with surprise. "You are a doctor?" "Pediatric surgeon from Boston. I was hiking when I saw what happened." Sarah gently transferred the little girl to her mother's arms. What's her name? Ayana, the woman said, holding her daughter close. It means eternal blossom in our language. I am her mother, Marie Walking Stick. She looked up at Sarah with tears streaming down her face. You saved my daughter's life. Other adults had arrived now, grandparents, uncles, family friends, all speaking Cherokee in rapid emotional bursts. Sarah caught fragments of English mixed in. The water spirit, sign from the ancestors, chosen by the river itself. She didn't understand the cultural context, but she could sense this rescue meant something more to them than a simple medical emergency. An elderly Cherokee man with silver hair, braided with eagle feathers, approached Sarah. His presence seemed to command respect from the others, who fell silent as he spoke. I am Thomas Blackfeather, elder of the Wolf clan, he said in carefully measured English. You have done something very significant today, Dr. Mitchell. Sarah blinked in surprise. You know my name? Rose Riversong called ahead. She said a doctor was staying at the Patterson cabin, that you carried heavy burdens and were seeking answers in our mountains. Thomas studied Sarah's face with eyes that seemed to see far more than the surface. The river brought you to Ayana at the exact moment. She needed you. This is not coincidence. I was just in the right place at the right time, Sarah said, uncomfortable with the weight he seemed to be giving her actions. Any decent person would have done the same thing. Perhaps, Thomas replied. But you are the one who was here. You are the one who risked your life for a Cherokee child you had never met. In our tradition, this creates bonds that cannot be easily broken. Marie Walking Stick spoke to Thomas in Cherokee, her voice earnest and urgent. He nodded solemnly, then turned back to Sarah. Marie says you breathed life back into her daughter. Among our people, this is not just medical intervention. It is spiritual connection. You have shared your life force with Ayana. Sarah felt increasingly out of her depth. She was a woman of science, trained to deal with measurable physiological processes, not spiritual connections and ancient traditions. I understand that you're grateful, and I'm honored by that. But I think you may be attributing more significance to this than— Dr. Mitchell, Thomas interrupted gently but firmly. You are a guest on our land, and we welcome you with open hearts. But please understand that what happened here today will be discussed by our Council of Elders. There are laws and customs that govern such situations, traditions that go back many generations. What kind of laws? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Ancient laws, sacred laws, laws that bind communities together and ensure that obligations are met. Thomas glanced at the other adults, who nodded their agreement. For now, we must get Ayana to our clinic for proper medical evaluation. Will you come with us? It wasn't really a question, Sarah realized. She was being invited, or perhaps required, to be part of whatever came next. She looked at little Ayana, now alert and clinging to her mother, and felt the same protective instinct that had driven her into the river in the first place. Of course, she said. The Cherokee Health Center was a modern facility that served the reservation, staffed by both Cherokee medical professionals and outside doctors who'd been accepted by the community. Dr. James Littlefeather, the attending physician who examined Ayana, was a Cherokee man about Sarah's age, who'd trained at Johns Hopkins before returning to serve his people. No signs of secondary drowning, no neurological deficits, he reported after a thorough examination. She was very fortunate. River drownings often end much differently. The water was very cold, Sarah said. That probably helped protect her. Brain during the brief period of oxygen deprivation. Dr. Littlefeather nodded approvingly. You know your emergency medicine. Marie tells me you're a pediatric surgeon from Boston Children's Hospital, though I'm currently on leave. Sarah didn't elaborate on the circumstances of her suspension. If you're planning to stay in the area for a while, we could use someone with your expertise. We have several children who need surgical consultations, but the nearest pediatric surgeon is in Asheville, 2 hours away. Before Sarah could respond, Thomas Blackfeather appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Mitchell, could I speak with you privately?" They walked to a quiet seating area in the health center's lobby, where Thomas settled into a chair with the deliberate movements of someone who chose his words as carefully as his actions. "I need to explain something to you about Cherokee law," he began. "What you did today, saving Ayana's life, creates what we call a life debt. It's an ancient concept that predates European contact by centuries." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "I don't want anyone feeling indebted to me. I did what anyone would do. But you are not just anyone, and this is not just any situation. You are an outsider who risked her life for one of our children. In Cherokee tradition, this means you have become connected to our community in a way that carries both privileges and responsibilities." "What kind of responsibilities?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. "The Council of Elders will meet tomorrow night to discuss your actions and their implications. I cannot tell you what they will decide, but I can tell you that your life may be about to change in ways you cannot imagine." That sounds ominous. Not ominous. Significant. There are laws in our tradition that govern the relationship between those who save lives and those whose lives are saved. These laws exist to ensure that the spiritual bonds created by such acts are properly honored. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with her still, damp clothes. "And if I don't want to be bound by Cherokee laws? If I just want to go back to my cabin and finish my vacation?" Thomas smiled, but his expression was serious. "Dr. Mitchell, you cannot save a Cherokee child's life on Cherokee land and expect to simply walk away unchanged. The river brought you to Ayana for a reason. Our traditions teach us to recognize such signs and respond appropriately. What if I don't believe in signs or ancient traditions? What if I'm just a doctor who happened to be in the right place at the right time? Then you will learn that some things are larger than our beliefs about them." Thomas stood to leave. "The council meets at sunset tomorrow. You are expected to attend." That evening, Sarah sat on her cabin's porch trying to process the day's events. She'd come to Cherokee territory seeking solitude and clarity about her future. Instead, she'd stumbled into a situation that seemed to be spinning beyond her control. Her phone had several missed calls from Boston, Dr. Webb checking on her, David's lawyer asking about the divorce papers, even a message from Maria Rodriguez, hoping she was getting the rest she needed. The contrast between that familiar world and her current situation felt surreal. Rose River Song appeared on the porch steps as if she'd materialized from the forest itself. In the fading light, the elderly Cherokee woman looked like something from another time, her silver hair gleaming and her dark eyes reflecting depths Sarah couldn't fathom. "I brought you dry clothes," Rose said, holding up a bundle. "Cherokee women's traditional dress. You'll need it for tomorrow's council meeting." "How did you know about the meeting?" "Word travels fast in our community. What you did today for? Ayana has everyone talking." Rose settled into the chair beside Sarah. "They're saying it was foretold." "Foretold by whom?" "By the dreams of our elders, by signs in the natural world, by the behavior of animals and the patterns of water. For weeks now, our spiritual leaders have been having dreams about a woman from the east who would come to our mountains carrying great sadness and would find her true purpose through an act of courage." Sarah laughed, but it sounded hollow even to her. "That could describe anyone. It's too vague to be a real prophecy." The dreams were specific about certain details. A woman with healing hands but a broken heart. A doctor who had lost faith in her ability to save lives. Someone who would find her true family not through blood, but through the sacred bonds of sacrifice. Sarah's laughter died. Those details were uncomfortably accurate. Even if that's all true, I'm not Cherokee. I don't belong to your community. I can't be bound by laws I don't understand or accept. Rose reached over and took Sarah's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Child, you don't understand what happened today. When you breathed life into Ayanna, you didn't just save her body. In our tradition, you shared your spirit with hers. You became connected to her in a way that transcends law or culture or personal choice. That's impossible. I performed CPR, a medical procedure. There's nothing spiritual about it. To you, perhaps, but Ayanna's family sees it differently. They believe you gave part of your life force to bring her back from the spirit world. In Cherokee law, this creates a bond that makes you spiritually responsible for her welfare. Sarah pulled her hand away. I can't be responsible for another child. I've failed too many already. That's why I'm here, because I couldn't save the patients who needed me most. And yet you saved Ayanna without hesitation, without thought, for your own safety, without any guarantee of success. You did what your heart commanded, not what your doubts whispered. The two women sat in silence as darkness fell over the mountains. Sarah could hear the distant sound of the Okonalufti River, its voice different now than it had seemed this morning. What had been merely rushing water now sounded almost like conversation, as if the river itself were discussing the day's events. What happens at this council meeting? Sarah finally asked. The elders will hear testimony about what you did. They'll consider the spiritual implications and the traditional laws that apply. Then they'll make a decision about what your actions mean for both you and our community. And if I refuse to participate, Rose's expression grew sad, then you'll miss the chance to discover who you were meant to become. The mountains called you here for a reason, Dr. Mitchell. The river tested you today, and you passed that test. Tomorrow, the council will offer you something precious, a place in our community, a purpose that goes beyond the failures that brought you here. Or they'll try to trap me in obligations I never agreed to. Only you can decide whether it's a trap or a gift, Rose said, standing to leave. But I will tell you this. Ayanna's family has already begun preparing for the possibility that you might become part of our community in a very special way. In Cherokee tradition, the person who saves a child's life can be adopted as that child's guardian, bound by sacred law to protect and provide for them. Sarah felt her heart stop. Adopted? As in legally responsible for Ayanna? Not just legally, spiritually, culturally, completely. It's called the Moon Law because it was given to our people during a night of full moon centuries ago. It's rarely invoked, but when it is, it creates bonds that last for generations. Long. After Rose had disappeared into the forest, Sarah sat on the porch, staring at the traditional Cherokee dress in her lap. Tomorrow's council meeting wasn't just about honoring her actions. It was about determining her future in ways she'd never imagined possible. She'd come to the mountains to escape responsibility, to find clarity about her failing career and collapsed marriage. Instead, she was facing the possibility of becoming legally and spiritually bound to a Cherokee child, required to honor laws and traditions she barely understood. The irony was crushing. In Boston, she'd been suspended from surgery for fighting. Too hard to save a patient. Here, saving a patient might cost her the freedom to ever leave. As she finally went inside to prepare for what might be the most important day of her life, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the river had indeed brought her here for a purpose, but that purpose might be far different from anything she'd ever imagined for herself. The Cherokee Council building stood at the heart of the reservation. Its modern architecture incorporating traditional elements that spoke of a people who honored their past while embracing their future. Seven-sided to represent the 7 clans of the Cherokee Nation. The building's windows faced all directions, symbolizing openness to wisdom from every corner of the world. Sarah stood at the entrance wearing the traditional dress Rose had provided, beautiful garment of deep blue with intricate silver beadwork that caught the last rays of sunset. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, though she knew that was impossible. Everything about this situation felt impossible, yet here she was, about to participate in a council meeting that might determine the rest of her life. "You look like you belong," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Dr. James Littlefeather, approaching, also dressed in traditional Cherokee attire. His presence was somehow comforting. At least one person in this surreal situation shared her medical background. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's culture," Sarah admitted. "This whole situation is beyond anything I was trained for." "Cherokee adoption ceremonies are rare," James said as they walked toward the building together. "I've only witnessed 2 in my lifetime, and both involved Cherokee families adopting children from other tribes. What's being proposed for you is almost unprecedented." "Proposed? I thought this was just a council meeting to discuss what happened yesterday." James paused at the doorway, his expression serious. "Sarah, you need to understand something. Marie." Walking Stick formally petitioned the council this morning to invoke the Moon Law on your behalf. The meeting tonight isn't just discussion. It's a formal hearing to determine whether you'll be adopted as Ayana's spiritual mother under Cherokee law. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "But I never agreed to." "Under Moon Law, your agreement isn't required for the initial petition. Your actions yesterday, risking your life to save Ayana, constitute automatic acceptance of responsibility in Cherokee tradition. Tonight's hearing will determine whether that responsibility becomes permanent." They entered the council chamber, a circular room with traditional Cherokee symbols carved into wooden panels that lined the walls. 7 high-backed chairs arranged in a semicircle faced a central fire pit, where a small flame burned steadily. Behind the chairs, the walls displayed artifacts that spoke of Cherokee history, ancient pottery, beadwork, weapons, and ceremonial objects that had survived centuries of upheaval. About 30 people sat in the gallery, Cherokee community members who had come to witness this unusual proceeding. Sarah recognized some faces from yesterday's rescue, Ayana's extended family, the children who had been playing by the river, adults who had rushed to help. Their expressions ranged from curious to deeply serious, and she noticed that several elders wore traditional regalia that marked them as keepers of ancient knowledge. Marie Walking Stick sat in the front row, dressed in white deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork. Beside her was Ayana, looking remarkably recovered from her ordeal and wearing a smaller version of her mother's traditional dress. When the little girl saw Sarah, she broke into a bright smile and waved enthusiastically. Thomas Blackfeather emerged from a side door, now wearing the full regalia of his position as tribal elder. Eagle feathers adorned his silver hair, and a breastplate of carved bone and silver crossed his chest. He was followed by 6 other elders, each representing one of the Cherokee clans, each carrying the weight of tradition and the responsibility of preserving their people's sacred laws. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell," Thomas said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber, "please come forward." Sarah walked to the center of the room, acutely aware of every eye upon her. The fire pit crackled softly, its light dancing across the carved symbols on the walls. She had never felt more out of place or more uncertain about what was expected of her. "We gather tonight under the ancient laws of our people," Thomas continued, "to consider a matter of great spiritual significance. Yesterday, this woman, a stranger to our community, risked her life to save one of our children. Today, we must determine what obligations and honors such an act creates." An elderly woman whom Sarah hadn't met before rose from the council chairs. She was perhaps 80 years old, her white hair braided with sacred herbs, her presence commanding despite her small stature. "I am Anna Firekiller, keeper of the Moon Law traditions," she announced. "For 40 years I have studied the sacred laws that govern our people's most important relationships. What brings us here tonight is both rare and profound." She gestured towards Sarah with a carved wooden staff. "Dr. Mitchell, do you understand why you have been asked to appear before this council?" "I'm beginning to," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Though I'm not sure I understand the full implications of Cherokee law as it applies to my situation." "Then let me explain," Anna said. "The Moon Law was given to our people during a time of great hardship, when many children were orphaned by war and disease. It established sacred bonds between those who save lives and those whose lives are saved, ensuring that no child would ever lack protection or guidance." She moved closer to Sarah, her dark eyes intense with ancient knowledge. "When you breathed life back into Ayana walking stick, you didn't just perform a medical procedure. You shared your spirit with hers, creating a bond that our law recognizes as stronger than blood, more binding than any written contract." Sarah felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the evening's coolness. "But I'm not Cherokee. I don't share your beliefs or understand your traditions. How can your laws apply to me?" "The river doesn't ask if you believe in water before it carries you downstream," Anna replied. "Some truths exist, whether we acknowledge them or not. Your heart called you to save that child, and your actions created bonds that transcend culture or belief." Thomas stepped forward. "Dr. Mitchell, we have investigated your background. We know about your work as a pediatric surgeon, your dedication to saving children's lives, your recent struggles with a system that values profit over healing." Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face because Thomas smiled slightly. "We are not as isolated from the outside world as some believe. We have friends and connections in many places, including Boston Children's Hospital." The implications of his words sank in slowly. "You've been checking up on me?" "We've been trying to understand why the river brought you to us at exactly the moment Ayana needed saving," said another elder, a man Sarah didn't recognize. "What we discovered suggests this was not random chance." Anna Firekiller nodded. 3 weeks ago, our dreamers began having visions of a woman from the east who would come to our mountains carrying great sorrow. They saw a healer who had lost faith in her gift, someone who would find her true purpose through an act of selfless courage. "Last week," Thomas added, "the signs in the natural world began to align. Eagles were seen flying in unusual patterns. The river changed its song. Even the plants in our medicine gardens began blooming out of season. Our traditional knowledge keepers interpreted these as signs that something significant was approaching." Sarah felt like she was trapped in a surreal dream. "You're saying my arrival here was prophesied?" "We're saying the spirit world prepared us for your coming," Anna replied. "What we couldn't have known was exactly how or when you would reveal yourself to our community." A new voice joined the conversation from the gallery. "If I may speak." Everyone turned to see Rose Riversong standing, her expression grave but determined. "I have information that might help the council understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." Thomas nodded for her to continue. "Dr. Mitchell, you told me yesterday that you came here to escape your failures, to find clarity about your future. But you didn't tell me about Emma Rodriguez." Sarah's blood ran cold. "How do you know about Emma?" "Because her grandmother is Cherokee," Rose said quietly. "Elena Rodriguez, Maria's mother, was born on this reservation. She left when she was 18 to marry a man from Boston, but she never forgot her heritage. When she learned that her granddaughter was dying and the family couldn't afford treatment, she reached out to our community for help. The council chamber had gone completely silent. Sarah felt as if the walls were closing in around her. "Elena called me 2 weeks ago," Rose continued. "She told me about a doctor who was fighting the hospital administration, trying to find a way to save her granddaughter. She said this doctor was risking her own career to help a family she barely knew, that she was spending her own time calling insurance companies and drug manufacturers begging for help." Thomas looked at Sarah with new understanding. "The child in Boston, the one whose case led to your suspension, she's Cherokee." Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. "And you've been carrying the weight of her situation, blaming yourself for the system's failures, questioning your ability to heal because you couldn't save her." "She's going to die," Sarah whispered. 7 years old, and she's going to die because her family can't afford the treatment that could save her. All my training, all my skills, and I'm powerless to help her." Anna Firekiller moved to stand directly in front of Sarah. "Child, do you not see the pattern? The Cherokee girl in Boston who needs healing, the Cherokee girl here who needed saving. The spirit world has been guiding you toward this moment your entire life." "That's impossible," Sarah said. But even as she spoke, she could feel the weight of coincidence that seemed too complex to be random. "Dr. Mitchell," Thomas said gently, "what would you say if I told you that our tribal council has been discussing Emma Rodriguez's situation, that we've been exploring ways to help pay for her treatment as part of our obligation to care for Cherokee children wherever they might be?" Sarah stared at him in shock. "You would do that?" "We've been trying to do that," Rose interjected, "but the hospital's financial office won't work with us directly. They need authorization from the child's primary physician to discuss alternative funding sources." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You need someone with medical authority to advocate for Emma with the hospital. Someone who understands both the medical system and our community's commitment to our children," Thomas confirmed. "Someone who has already proven their dedication to saving Cherokee lives." Anna Firekiller raised her carved staff. "Dr. Mitchell, the Moon Law doesn't just create obligations, it creates opportunities. If you accept adoption as Ayana's spiritual mother, you become a member of our community with all the rights and responsibilities that entails, including the right to act on behalf of Cherokee children in medical situations." Sarah's mind reeled as she began to understand the full scope of what was being offered. "You're saying that if I accept this adoption, I could help Emma get the treatment she needs?" "We're saying that the river brought you to us for many reasons," Thomas replied. "Saving Ayana was just the beginning. Your true purpose, the healing you came here seeking, might be much larger than you imagined." The council chamber fell silent except for the crackling of the sacred fire. Sarah looked around at the faces watching her, Cherokee elders who had maintained their traditions through centuries of hardship, a community that was offering to make her one of their own, a little girl who smiled at her with complete trust. In Boston, Emma Rodriguez was probably sleeping in a hospital bed, her mother holding vigil beside her, both of them running out of time and hope. Here, in this ancient council chamber, Sarah was being offered not just a new identity, but a new purpose, one that might allow her to save both Cherokee children who had somehow become central to her life. The unexpected participant in this drama, she realized, wasn't some mysterious figure who would change everything. It was her own past, her own failures and guilt and desperate desire to heal, all converging in a moment that demanded she choose between the life she'd known and the life she might become. As the council waited for her response, Sarah felt the weight of 2 children's futures resting in her hands and understood that some rescues require more than medical skill. They require the courage to be rescued yourself. The silence in the council chamber stretched until it became almost unbearable. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 30 pairs of eyes watching her process the magnitude of what had just been revealed. 2 Cherokee. Children, separated by hundreds of miles, but connected by blood and circumstance, both depending on her decisions in ways she was only beginning to understand. "I need a moment," Sarah said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. This is not what I expected when I came here." Anna Firekiller nodded with understanding. "The spirit world rarely announces its intentions in advance, child. We discover our purpose by walking the path, not by studying maps." Thomas gestured toward a side door. "Dr. Mitchell, would you like to step outside for some air? We can reconvene when you're ready." Sarah gratefully accepted the offer and found herself on a small porch that overlooked the reservation's central plaza. The night air was crisp and clean, filled with the sounds of the forest settling into darkness. Behind her she could hear quiet conversations in Cherokee as the council members and community discussed the situation she had inadvertently created. Dr. James Littlefeather joined her on the porch, carrying 2 cups of traditional Cherokee tea. "Complicated evening," he said, offering her one of the cups. "That's an understatement." Sarah accepted the tea gratefully, inhaling its earthy aroma. "James, can I ask you something as one doctor to another?" "Of course. Do you believe in all this? The prophecies, the spiritual connections, the idea that some cosmic force guided me here?" James was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the mountains that surrounded the reservation. "I spent 8 years in medical school and residency learning to think scientifically, to rely on evidence and measurable outcomes. When I came back here to practice, I had to reconcile that training with traditional Cherokee beliefs that can't be proven in any laboratory. And I've learned that some things can be true without being provable. I've seen healing happen in ways that medical textbooks can't explain. I've watched people recover from illnesses after participating in traditional ceremonies, changes that shouldn't have been possible according to everything I learned in medical school." Sarah sipped the tea, finding its warmth comforting despite her inner turmoil. But this situation, the timing, the connections between Emma and Ayanna, it seems like too much coincidence to be real. "Maybe it is coincidence," James replied. "Or maybe the Cherokee understanding of how the world works is more sophisticated than we give it credit for. Our ancestors survived for thousands of years by reading patterns, by understanding connections that weren't always obvious to outsiders." Before Sarah could respond, the porch door opened and Marie Walkingstick stepped outside. She approached hesitantly, as if unsure of her welcome. "Dr. Mitchell, may I speak with you?" Sarah nodded, and James excused himself to give them privacy. Marie sat beside Sarah on the wooden bench, her traditional white deerskin dress gleaming in the moonlight. "I wanted to thank you again for saving my daughter, but also to explain why I petitioned the council for your adoption. I have to admit, I'm still struggling to understand Cherokee law. In my world, adoption requires lengthy legal processes, background checks, home studies. The idea that saving someone's life automatically creates parental obligations is foreign to me." "Perhaps I can help you understand by telling you about Ayanna's father," Marie said quietly. "He was a soldier, deployed to Afghanistan when she was 2 years old. He never came home." Sarah felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss." His death left Ayanna without a father figure, without the balance that Cherokee children need between male and female spiritual guidance. "For 4 years, my family has been praying to the ancestors for guidance about how to provide what she was missing." Marie turned to face Sarah directly. "When you saved her life yesterday, when you breathed your spirit into hers to bring her back from the edge of death, the elders saw it as an answer to those prayers. But I'm not Cherokee. I don't understand your traditions or speak your language. How could I possibly provide spiritual guidance to a Cherokee child? The spirit world doesn't always work the way we expect, Marie replied. Sometimes the answers to our prayers come in forms we don't recognize until later. Your medical knowledge, your dedication to healing children, your willingness to risk everything for a child you'd never met. These are the qualities of a spiritual mother. Sarah felt tears threatening. Marie, I appreciate what you're saying, but I've already failed one child. In Boston, there's a little girl who's going to die because I couldn't save her. How can you trust me with Ayanna when I couldn't? Protect Emma? Because, said a new voice from the doorway, saving Emma Rodriguez might require exactly the kind of spiritual connection you're afraid to accept. Sarah turned to see Rose Riversong emerging from the building, followed by an elderly Cherokee woman she didn't recognize. The stranger was perhaps 90 years old, her white hair braided with what looked like ancient beads, her dark eyes holding depths that seemed to encompass centuries of wisdom. Dr. Mitchell, Rose said, I'd like you to meet Elena Rodriguez's Aunt Agnes Swimmer. She's one of our oldest living elders and keeper of our most sacred healing traditions. Agnes approached with the careful movements of great age, but her voice was strong and clear. Dr. Mitchell, I have traveled here from our western lands to speak with you about my great-great-niece, Emma. Sarah's heart stopped. You're Emma's family. Elena Rodriguez was my brother's granddaughter. When she left the reservation to marry and live in Boston, we maintained contact, but respected her choice to raise her family in the white world. When her granddaughter became ill, Elena reached out to our healing societies for help. Agnes settled carefully onto the bench beside Sarah. For 2 months, our medicine people have been conducting ceremonies for Emma's healing. We've been calling on the ancient spirits, asking for guidance about how to help a Cherokee child trapped in a world that values money more than life. And 3 weeks ago, during a full moon ceremony, I had a vision. I saw a woman with healing hands who carried great sadness, someone who would find her way to our people through an act of courage. In my vision, this woman became the bridge between two worlds, the bridge Emma needed to find her way home to healing. Sarah felt the world spinning around her. You're saying you saw me in a vision before we ever met? I saw a spiritual mother who would claim 2 Cherokee daughters, Agnes replied. One she would save from drowning, one she would save from dying. I saw the moon law being invoked for the first time in 50 years, creating bonds that would heal not just children, but an entire community's relationship with the outside world. Marie Walking Stick leaned forward eagerly. Agnes, does this mean the healing societies will support the adoption? More than support it, Agnes replied. We've been preparing for it. The ceremonies have already begun to bind Dr. Mitchell to our community spiritually. Whether she accepts the legal adoption or not, the spiritual bonds have already been formed. Sarah felt panic rising. What do you mean, bonds have already been formed? I never consented to any ceremonies. When you dove into the Oconaluftee River to save Ayanna, Rose explained gently, when you breathed life back into her body, when you shared your spirit with hers, those actions constituted your participation in the most sacred of Cherokee ceremonies. The river itself was your ceremonial ground. Agnes nodded slowly. In our tradition, there are some ceremonies that don't require formal participation. When someone acts with pure intention to save a Cherokee life, they automatically become part of our spiritual community. The legal adoption is simply our way of acknowledging what has already occurred in the spirit world. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch. This is insane. You're telling me that I accidentally participated in religious ceremonies I didn't know were happening, that I'm now spiritually bound to a child I met 2 days ago, and that somehow this is connected to a patient I've been treating in Boston for months? Yes, Agnes said simply, though I would not use the word accidentally. The spirits guided every step of your journey here, just as they guided Emma's illness to bring her family into contact with our healing societies. But Emma isn't even on the reservation. She's hundreds of miles away in a Boston hospital. How does my being adopted into the Cherokee community help her? Rose and Agnes exchanged meaningful looks before Rose answered. Because Cherokee law recognizes no geographical boundaries when it comes to the welfare of our children. If you become Ayana's spiritual mother through moon law adoption, you gain the legal authority to act on behalf of any Cherokee child, anywhere in the world. The implications hit Sarah like lightning. You mean I could authorize Emma's treatment? I could work directly with the hospital as her advocate? More than that, Agnes replied. You could access Cherokee Nation healthcare funding that's been set aside specifically for situations like Emma's. Our people have been saving money for months to help with her treatment, but we needed someone with medical authority to coordinate with the hospital. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. How much money are we talking about? Enough to cover the experimental treatment and ongoing care, Rose said. Our community may be small, but we take care of our children, always. And all I have to do is accept adoption as Ayana's spiritual mother. All you have to do, Agnes corrected gently, is accept who you were always meant to become. The adoption ceremony doesn't change you, Dr. Mitchell. It simply recognizes the truth of what you already are. Marie Walkingstick stood and moved to where Sarah was standing. Dr. Mitchell, I want you to know that if you accept this adoption, you won't be taking my place as Ayana's mother. Cherokee tradition recognizes that children can have multiple spiritual parents, each providing different gifts and guidance. What would be expected of me? To love her, to guide her, to use your gifts as a healer to help her grow into the woman she's meant to become, to be present for important ceremonies and life passages, to serve as a bridge between the Cherokee world and the medical world when needed. Sarah looked at these three Cherokee women, Agnes with her ancient wisdom, Rose with her quiet strength, Marie with her fierce love for her daughter, and realized they were offering her something she'd never dared to hope for, a chance to be part of a family, a community, a tradition larger than herself. And Emma? She asked. If I do this, you're certain I could help her? As certain as the sunrise, Agnes replied. The vision I had 3 weeks ago showed both girls healthy and strong, growing up as sisters in spirit if not in blood. It showed you finding the purpose. You came to these mountains seeking. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking about Emma Rodriguez, lying in her hospital bed, pale and weak from chemotherapy that wasn't working. She thought about Maria Rodriguez, working multiple jobs to pay for treatments. That might save her daughter. She thought about her own failures, her suspension from surgery, her collapsed marriage, and the overwhelming sense that she'd lost her way as a healer. When she opened her eyes, she found Agnes watching her with an expression of infinite patience. The choice is yours, child, the elder said softly, but know that whatever you decide, you have already changed the course of many lives. The question now is whether you're brave enough to let your own life be changed in return. The porch door opened, and Thomas Blackfeather appeared. Dr. Mitchell, the council is ready to reconvene when you are. Have you reached a decision about the moon law adoption? Sarah looked once more at the mountains surrounding the reservation, at the ancient forests that had sheltered Cherokee people for countless generations, at the community that was offering to make her one of their own, despite her outsider status. In Boston, a little Cherokee girl was running out of time. Here, another Cherokee girl was waiting to see if the woman who saved her life would choose to become her spiritual mother. And somewhere between those two children and their very different needs, Sarah Mitchell was about to discover who she truly was. Yes, she said quietly. I've reached a decision. The council chamber felt different when Sarah re-entered, as if The very air had shifted to accommodate the weight of the decision she was about to make. The sacred fire seemed to burn brighter, its flames dancing with an energy that spoke of ancient powers awakening. The 7 elders sat in their traditional positions, their faces grave but expectant, while the community members in the gallery leaned forward with collective anticipation. Thomas Blackfeather rose as Sarah took her place in the center of the circle. "Dr. Mitchell, have you reached a decision regarding the Moon Law adoption?" "I have," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But before I give my answer, I need to understand something that's been troubling me. How is it possible that all these connections exist? The timing, the prophecies, the fact that both Ayanna and Emma are Cherokee children who needed saving? It feels like more than coincidence." Anna Firekiller stood, her carved staff gleaming in the firelight. "You ask the right questions, child. The answer requires that we share history that few outside our community have ever heard." She moved to stand beside the sacred fire, her ancient eyes reflecting its glow. "What I'm about to tell you about Emma Rodriguez's family will help you understand why your presence here was not chance, but destiny fulfilling itself." Agnes Swimmer, who had taken a seat of honor among the elders, nodded for Anna to continue. 60 years ago, Anna began, there was a Cherokee girl named Catherine Swimmer. She was Agnes's niece, a gifted healer who showed unusual ability with traditional medicine from a very young age. Catherine could diagnose illnesses by touch, could sense when someone was near death, could call healing spirits that others couldn't reach. Sarah glanced at Agnes, seeing profound sadness cross the elderly woman's features. When Catherine was 16, she fell in love with a white doctor who came to the reservation to study Cherokee medicinal practices. Dr. William Harrison was a young man from Boston, brilliant but arrogant, who believed scientific medicine was superior to our traditional ways. Anna's voice grew heavy with old pain. Catherine shared our healing secrets with him, taught him about plants and ceremonies that had been protected knowledge for generations. In return, he promised to marry her and take her to Boston, where she could study to become a real doctor. As he put it, "What happened?" Sarah asked, though she suspected the story wouldn't end well. "What always happened in those days when white men made promises to Cherokee women," Agnes spoke for the first time since entering the chamber. "He left when his research was complete, taking our knowledge with him but leaving Catherine behind. She was pregnant with his child." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. "Elena Rodriguez's mother?" "Yes," Agnes confirmed. "Catherine gave birth to a daughter she named Eleanor, but the heartbreak of William's betrayal changed her. She lost her healing gifts, couldn't touch the spiritual world that had once responded to her call. In despair, she took Eleanor and left the reservation, determined to raise her daughter in the white world that had stolen her beloved." Anna resumed the story. "Catherine made Eleanor promise never to acknowledge her Cherokee heritage, never to return to the reservation, never to seek out the healing traditions that were her birthright. She wanted to protect her daughter from the pain she had suffered. But Elena married a man named Rodriguez," Sarah said, trying to follow the family connections. "A good man who accepted Elena's silence about her past," Agnes replied. "Elena kept her mother's secret for 40 years, raising her own children without any connection to Cherokee tradition. It was only when her granddaughter Emma became ill that Elena finally reached out to us." Thomas Blackfeather stepped forward. "Dr. Mitchell, do you remember the name of the doctor who broke Catherine Swimmer's heart? The man who stole Cherokee, healing knowledge and left our people?" Sarah's heart began to race. "Dr. William Harrison. Does that name mean anything to you?" Harrison is my maiden name. My grandfather was Dr. William Harrison." The words felt like stones in her throat. "But he was a professor of medicine at Harvard, a researcher who published papers on ethnobotany. He never told our family about working with Native Americans." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could Feel the weight of revelation settling over her like a heavy blanket. Agnes rose slowly from her chair. Your grandfather built his career on Cherokee knowledge. The papers he published, the treatments he developed, the reputation that made him famous in medical circles, all of it was based on what Catherine taught him in secret. That's impossible, Sarah whispered, but even as she spoke, memories began surfacing. Her grandfather's study filled with pressed plants and detailed notes about medicinal herbs, his obsession with what he called folk remedies that seemed to work better than traditional medicine. The way he'd always been secretive about his early research, claiming his sources were proprietary. Your grandfather never acknowledged Catherine's contributions, Thomas said. He presented Cherokee healing knowledge as his own discoveries, profited from wisdom that had been freely shared with him in love and trust. Anna Firekiller moved closer to Sarah. But the spirit world has its own justice, child. William Harrison's granddaughter has been called to heal the great-great-granddaughter of the woman he wronged. The circle is completing itself in ways your grandfather never could have imagined. Sarah felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. You're saying that Emma and I are connected through our family histories, that my grandfather's betrayal of Catherine Swimmer is somehow linked to Emma's illness? We're saying that healing sometimes requires multiple generations, Agnes replied. Catherine's broken heart created wounds that affected her daughter and granddaughter and great-granddaughter. Your grandfather's theft of our knowledge created a debt that the spirit world is now calling you to repay. Dr. James Littlefeather, who had been listening from the gallery, stood up. Sarah, this explains something that's been puzzling me about Emma's case. Her leukemia has genetic markers that are extremely rare in Hispanic populations, but common among Cherokee people with specific clan affiliations. What do you mean? Sarah asked. The experimental treatment that could save her life. It was actually developed using genetic research based on Cherokee DNA samples that were collected decades ago without proper consent from our community. The revelations kept coming, each one more staggering than the last. Sarah turned to Agnes. Are you saying that the treatment Emma needs was developed using Cherokee genetic material? Material that was taken from our people, the same way your grandfather took our healing knowledge, Agnes confirmed. Taken without permission, without acknowledgement, without compensation. Anna raised her staff, calling for attention. Dr. Mitchell, your family's debt to the Cherokee people runs deeper than you knew, but debts can be repaid, wrongs can be righted, and healing can happen when people choose courage over comfort. What are you asking of me? We're asking you to do what your grandfather should have done 60 years ago, Thomas said, to acknowledge the source of the knowledge that built your family's medical legacy, to use your position and skills to ensure that Cherokee children receive the healing they deserve. Rose Riversong stood from the gallery. Sarah, your grandfather's research papers are still cited in medical journals. His work on plant-based treatments has influenced generations of doctors. If you accept the Moon Law adoption, you gain the authority to set the record straight, to ensure that Catherine Swimmer receives the recognition she deserved. More importantly, Agnes added, you gain the spiritual authority to call upon Cherokee, healing traditions that could complement Emma's medical treatment, traditional ceremonies that might help her body accept the experimental drugs, that might strengthen her spirit for the fight ahead. Sarah's mind reeled as she processed the implications. You want me to combine traditional Cherokee healing with modern medical treatment? We want you to heal the breach between two worlds that should never have been separated, Anna replied. Cherokee knowledge and white medicine working together, as Catherine and your grandfather should have done from the beginning. Marie Walkingstick approached from the gallery, carrying a bundle wrapped in white deer skin. Dr. Mitchell, Agnes brought something from the western lands that belongs to your family. Agnes carefully unwrapped the bundle to reveal a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. This belonged to Catherine Swimmer. It contains detailed records of every healing technique she taught your grandfather, every plant medicine she shared, every ceremony she described. She kept these notes hoping that someday her knowledge would return to benefit Cherokee people. Sarah took the journal with trembling hands, opening it to see page after page of detailed drawings and descriptions in Catherine's careful handwriting. Plants she recognized from her grandfather's research, techniques that had become standard, medical treatments, ceremonies that blended spiritual and physical healing in ways Western medicine was only beginning to understand. Catherine wrote this after your grandfather left, Agnes explained. She wanted to preserve the knowledge he had taken, to ensure it wouldn't be lost to our people. She spent the last 40 years of her life documenting everything she had taught. Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she read Catherine's words. The healing power of our people must not die with the betrayal of those we trusted. Someday, someone will come who can bridge these worlds with honor, someone who will use this knowledge to heal rather than to profit. She knew, Sarah whispered. Catherine knew that someone would come. She prayed for it, Agnes corrected. Every day, until her death 10 years ago, she prayed that the spirits would send someone to complete the healing that had been interrupted by your grandfather's betrayal. Anna Firekiller struck her staff against the wooden floor 3 times, the sound echoing through the chamber like thunder. Dr. Mitchell, the choice before you is larger than the adoption of one child. You are being called to heal wounds that have festered for 3 generations, to restore balance between knowledge and wisdom, between taking and giving. If I accept the Moon Law adoption, Sarah said slowly, I'm not just becoming Ayana's spiritual mother. I'm accepting responsibility for healing the damage my grandfather caused to the Cherokee community. You're accepting the opportunity to transform that damage into blessing, Thomas corrected, to use your medical knowledge and your family's resources to ensure that Cherokee children like Emma receive the healing they need. Sarah looked around the council chamber at the faces watching her, Agnes with her ancient wisdom, Anna with her sacred authority, Marie with her mother's love, Thomas with his leadership responsibilities. Behind them, the community members who had witnessed this extraordinary revelation sat in respectful silence, understanding that they were present for a moment that would reshape relationships between their people and the outside world. In her hands, Catherine Swimmer's journal felt heavy with more than paper and ink. It carried the weight of betrayed trust, stolen knowledge, and broken promises. But it also carried hope. The hope that healing was possible, that justice delayed was not justice denied, that love could triumph over betrayal even across generations. The decision is yours, child, Agnes said softly, but know that Catherine's spirit has been waiting 60 years for this moment. The choice you make tonight will determine whether her sacrifice leads to healing or whether the wounds of the past continue to poison the future. Sarah closed the journal and looked directly at Ayana, who had been sitting quietly with her mother throughout these revelations. The little girl smiled at her with complete trust, unaware of the complex family histories and ancient betrayals that had led to this moment. To Ayana, Sarah was simply the woman who had saved her life, someone who had proven worthy of love and trust. In that innocent smile, Sarah saw not just one Cherokee child, but all the Cherokee children who had been affected by her grandfather's betrayal, including Emma Rodriguez lying in a Boston hospital bed, fighting for her life with treatments developed from knowledge that had been stolen from her own people. The time had come to choose not just her own future, but the future of healing itself. I accept, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the council chamber with quiet determination. I accept adoption as Ayana's spiritual mother under Cherokee Moon Law, and I accept the responsibility to heal the wounds my family created. The words seemed to release something in the air. a collective breath that the entire community had been holding. Ayanna clapped her hands in delight, while Marie Walkingstick's eyes filled with tears of joy. The elders nodded their approval, but Sarah could see something else in their expressions, relief mixed with apprehension, as if her acceptance had solved one problem while creating entirely new ones. Anna Firekiller struck her staff against the floor 3 times, then let the ceremony begin. But first, Dr. Mitchell, you must understand that accepting Moon Law adoption creates obligations that extend far beyond this reservation. Are you prepared for what that means? Before Sarah could answer, the council chamber doors burst open with a violence that shattered the sacred atmosphere. 3 men in expensive suits strode in, their presence immediately hostile and out of place among the traditional setting. The lead figure was a tall man with silver hair and cold blue eyes, flanked by 2 younger associates carrying briefcases and recording devices. "This ceremony stops now," the silver-haired man announced, his voice cutting through the chamber. "Like a blade, I am Attorney General Richard Caldwell from the state of North Carolina, and I'm here to inform this assembly that you are conducting an illegal adoption proceeding." Thomas Blackfeather rose slowly, his dignity intact, despite the intrusion. "Mr. Caldwell, this is sovereign Cherokee territory conducting business under Cherokee law. You have no jurisdiction here." "That's where you're wrong," Caldwell replied, pulling out a legal document. "The state of North Carolina has filed an emergency injunction challenging this so-called Moon Law adoption. Dr. Sarah Mitchell is a licensed physician whose professional conduct is governed by state medical boards, not tribal ceremonies." Sarah felt the chamber spinning around her. "I don't understand. How did you even know about this meeting?" One of Caldwell's associates, a younger man with the hungry look of an ambitious prosecutor, stepped forward. "Dr. Mitchell, you've been under investigation by the Massachusetts Medical Board since your suspension last week. When you crossed state lines while under professional review, it triggered interstate monitoring protocols. They've been watching you," Dr. James Littlefeather said grimly, "tracking your movements, monitoring your activities." Caldwell smiled coldly. "Dr. Mitchell, your recent behavior has raised serious questions about your mental stability and professional judgment. Fighting with hospital administration, harassing insurance companies, making unauthorized contact with pharmaceutical manufacturers, and now attempting to participate in primitive religious ceremonies that have no legal standing in modern society." Agnes Swimmer stood with the careful dignity of extreme age, her voice carrying the authority of 9 decades. "Young man, these ceremonies have been conducted on this land for longer than your government has existed. Our laws predate your constitution by centuries. Your laws are cultural traditions with no legal force," Caldwell replied dismissively. "What you're attempting here amounts to kidnapping, taking custody of a child through unauthorized means, and attempting to create parental rights for someone who has undergone no proper legal vetting." Marie Walkingstick stepped protectively in front of Ayanna. "No one is kidnapping my daughter. I petitioned for this adoption freely, under laws that my people have honored since time immemorial. Laws that were superseded when this territory became part of the United States," Caldwell's second associate interjected. "Ms. Walkingstick, if you proceed with this ceremony, you could face charges of child endangerment and conspiracy to circumvent proper adoption procedures." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, the same fierce protectiveness that had driven her into the river to save Ayanna. "Mr. Caldwell, exactly who filed this injunction? Who asked the state to interfere in Cherokee internal affairs?" Caldwell's smile grew wider. "That information is part of an ongoing investigation. What I can tell you is that concerned parties have brought it to our attention that you pose a potential threat to the welfare of Cherokee children." "What concerned parties?" Thomas demanded. "Dr. Mitchell's former colleagues at Boston Children's Hospital," the younger associate replied, consulting his notes. Dr. Harrison Webb filed a formal complaint expressing concern about her mental state and suggesting she might be experiencing a psychotic break involving religious delusions. Sarah's blood ran cold. Dr. Webb reported me to North Carolina authorities. He filed a professional concern report when you failed to respond to hospital communications and were discovered to be participating in what he described as primitive religious ceremonies involving claimed supernatural healing powers. Caldwell explained, the Massachusetts Medical Board forwarded his concerns to us when they learned of your location. Rose Riversong stepped forward, her voice sharp with indignation. And how exactly did Dr. Webb learn about Cherokee ceremonies? Someone has been feeding him information about private tribal business. That's irrelevant, Caldwell replied. What matters is that Dr. Mitchell is subject to medical licensing regulations that prohibit participation in unscientific healing. In practices, if she proceeds with this adoption ceremony, her medical license will be revoked permanently. The threat hung in the air like poison. Sarah understood immediately what was happening. Her suspension from surgery had been just the beginning. Someone was orchestrating a systematic campaign to destroy her medical career and prevent her from helping Emma Rodriguez. Mr. Caldwell, she said carefully, is this investigation connected to the Emma Rodriguez case? To the funding arrangements we've been discussing for her treatment? Caldwell's expression became guarded. I'm not at liberty to discuss ongoing medical investigations, but his evasion told Sarah everything she needed to know. Someone had learned about the Cherokee community's plan to fund Emma's treatment and was moving to prevent it. The timing of this legal intervention, coming precisely at the moment of the adoption ceremony, was no coincidence. Anna Firekiller struck her staff against the floor with unusual force. Mr. Caldwell, you speak of laws and regulations, but you ignore the most fundamental law of all, the obligation to save a child's life. Are you here to prevent the healing of Cherokee children? I'm here to prevent unlicensed medical practice and fraudulent adoption procedures, Caldwell replied. If this community wants to help sick children, they can donate money through proper channels, not conduct quasi-religious ceremonies that create false legal relationships. Proper channels. Agnes Swimmer's voice carried decades of accumulated bitterness. The same proper channels that have been denying Cherokee children adequate health care for generations. The same system that allows a 7-year-old to die because her family can't afford treatment that costs less than what the government spends on military equipment in a single day. Thomas Blackfeather moved to stand beside Sarah. Mr. Caldwell, Cherokee sovereignty means we conduct our internal affairs according to our own laws. If Dr. Mitchell chooses to accept adoption under Moon Law, that is a matter between her, our community, and our traditional legal system. Not if she wants to maintain her medical license, Caldwell countered. The state of North Carolina has agreements with Massachusetts regarding professional licensing reciprocity. Dr. Mitchell can choose to be a Cherokee spiritual mother or a licensed physician, but not both. The stark choice hit Sarah like a physical blow. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd sacrificed to become a doctor, was being held hostage to prevent her from helping Cherokee children. Dr. Littlefeather stepped forward, his medical credentials lending weight to his words. Mr. Caldwell, I'm also a licensed physician, and I practice both traditional Cherokee healing and modern medicine. Are you saying that combining indigenous knowledge with medical practice is grounds for license revocation? When it involves participation in ceremonies that claim supernatural healing powers, yes, Caldwell replied. Medical professionals are held to scientific standards, not shamanic beliefs. Then you're essentially saying that Cherokee healing traditions are incompatible with modern medical practice, Sarah said, understanding the full scope of what was happening. You're forcing Cherokee doctors to choose between their cultural heritage, and their professional lives. I'm enforcing medical standards that protect the public from fraudulent healing claims, Caldwell insisted. Agnes moved closer to Sarah, her ancient eyes blazing with fire. Child, do you see what they're doing? They're using the same tactics your grandfather used, claiming that Cherokee knowledge is primitive, unscientific, dangerous. They're trying to separate healing from wisdom, medicine from spirit. But this time, Rose added, they're using legal force instead of personal betrayal. Marie Walking Stick lifted Ayana into her arms, the little girl sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. Dr. Mitchell, I don't want you to lose everything because of us. If accepting the adoption means destroying your career, it means choosing between two kinds of healing, Sarah interrupted, finally understanding the true nature of the test she was facing. Between the medicine that saves individual patients and the healing that can save entire communities. Caldwell sensed victory. Dr. Mitchell, be reasonable. You're a brilliant surgeon with a promising career ahead of you. Don't throw that away for primitive ceremonies that have no real power to heal anyone. No real power. Sarah looked around the council chamber at the Cherokee elders who had maintained their healing traditions through centuries of persecution, at the community that had raised money to save a Cherokee child they'd never met, at the little girl whose life she'd saved with her own hands and heart. Mr. Caldwell, in the past week I've learned more about real healing than I did in 15 years of medical training. These people don't just treat symptoms, they heal families, communities, relationships between the living and the dead. They understand that medicine without wisdom is just expensive chemistry. Touching sentiments, Caldwell replied coldly, but legally irrelevant. You have 30 minutes to decide. Abandon this adoption ceremony and return to Boston to face professional review, or proceed with these rituals and lose your medical license permanently. As Caldwell and his associates withdrew to wait for her decision, Sarah found herself facing the most difficult choice of her life. Everything she'd worked for, every patient she might save in the future, every family she might help, all of it balanced against the chance to heal wounds that had festered for generations and save two Cherokee children who desperately needed her. The sacred fire continued to burn in the center of the chamber, its flames dancing with ancient wisdom. In its light, Sarah could see not just the choice between two careers, but between two ways of understanding what it meant to heal. The battle for Cherokee children's lives was about to begin in earnest, and Sarah would have to decide not just who she wanted to become, but what kind of healer the world truly needed. Sarah stood in the center of the council chamber, feeling the weight of two worlds pressing down on her shoulders. Attorney General Caldwell and his associates waited outside, their legal documents and threats representing everything she was being asked to abandon. Inside, the Cherokee elders held their sacred space, offering her a future she'd never imagined, but was beginning to understand might be exactly what she was meant for. I need to make a phone call, Sarah announced, surprising everyone in the chamber. Thomas Blackfeather nodded. Of course, take whatever time you need. Sarah stepped onto the porch, where she'd had so many crucial conversations over the past 2 days. The mountain air was crisp and clean, filled with the sounds of night creatures beginning their ancient songs. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Maria? It's Dr. Mitchell. I know it's late, but I need to talk to you. About Emma. Maria Rodriguez's voice was thick with exhaustion and worry. Dr. Mitchell, thank God you called. Emma's condition deteriorated today. The doctors here say we're running out of time to start the experimental treatment. Sarah closed, her eyes feeling the familiar ache of a child slipping away, while bureaucracy and money stood as barriers to healing. Maria, I'm calling from Cherokee territory in North Carolina. I've discovered something about Emma's heritage that changes everything. What do you mean? Emma is Cherokee. Her great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee healer named Catherine Swimmer. The Cherokee Nation has been trying to help fund Emma's treatment, but they needed someone with medical authority to coordinate with the hospital. Silence on the other end, then. Cherokee, but we're not. My mother never. Your grandmother Eleanor kept it secret to protect your family from discrimination. But Maria, that heritage might be what saves Emma's life. The Cherokee community has enough money to cover the experimental treatment, and they want to help her. They would do that for us, for Emma. She's one of their children, and Cherokee people take care of their own. Sarah paused, gathering courage for what she needed to say next. But there's something I need to tell you about my own family's connection to this situation. Over the next 10 minutes, Sarah explained the complex web of history connecting her grandfather's betrayal of Catherine Swimmer to Emma's current crisis. She told Maria about the stolen healing knowledge, about the genetic research that had led to Emma's experimental treatment, about the spiritual debts that spanned generations. Dr. Mitchell, Maria said when Sarah finished, are you saying that the treatment that could save my daughter was developed using Cherokee knowledge that your grandfather stole? Yes, and I'm being offered the chance to help make that right, to ensure Emma gets the healing she deserves. But it means giving up my medical license and accepting adoption into the Cherokee community under their traditional laws. You would do that? For Emma? Sarah looked back through the council chamber windows at Ayanna, who had fallen asleep in her mother's arms while the adults debated her future. The little girl's peaceful face reminded Sarah why she'd become a doctor in the first place, not for prestige or career advancement, but to save children's lives. Maria, I need you to tell me something honestly. If I lose my medical license, but Emma gets the treatment she needs, if she gets to grow up healthy and strong, but I can never practice surgery again, would you want me to make that choice? The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Maria spoke, her voice breaking with emotion. Dr. Mitchell, you've already sacrificed more for Emma than any doctor should have to. You fought the hospital, you called insurance companies, you got suspended trying to help us. I can't ask you to give up everything. You're not asking, I'm choosing. But I need to know that you'll accept help from the Cherokee community, that you'll let them be part of Emma's healing process. If it saves my daughter's life, I'll accept help from anyone, anywhere. Sarah smiled for the first time in days. Then I know what I have to do. She ended the call and returned to the council chamber where the elders waited with infinite patience. Attorney General Caldwell and his associates were still outside, checking their watches and muttering about legal deadlines. I've made my decision, Sarah announced. But before I give my answer, I want to propose something that might change the entire situation. Anna Firekiller gestured for her to continue. Mr. Caldwell is threatening to revoke my medical license if I participate in Cherokee healing ceremonies. He's claiming that traditional Cherokee medicine is incompatible with licensed medical practice. But what if we proved him wrong? Thomas leaned forward with interest. What do you have in mind? Sarah held up Catherine Swimmer's journal. This contains detailed documentation of Cherokee healing practices that were stolen and incorporated into modern medical treatments without acknowledgement. What if we use this as evidence to establish legal recognition of Cherokee healing knowledge as legitimate medical practice? Dr. Littlefeather stood up excitedly. Sarah, are you thinking of challenging the medical licensing system itself? I'm thinking of expanding it. Instead of forcing Cherokee healers to choose between traditional knowledge and medical licenses, what if we created a new category of licensed practice that combines both? Agnes Swimmer's eyes lit up with understanding. You want to use the legal system to force recognition of Cherokee healing traditions as legitimate medicine. More than that, I want to establish legal precedent that indigenous healing knowledge has the same standing as Western medical training. that doctors who practice traditional healing aren't violating medical standards, they're expanding them. Rose Riversong clapped her hands together. Child, you're not just talking about saving 2 Cherokee children. You're talking about changing the entire relationship between indigenous knowledge and mainstream medicine. I'm talking about honoring Catherine Swimmer's legacy in a way that helps Cherokee children for generations to come, Sarah replied. If we can establish legal precedent for combined practice, Cherokee doctors won't have to choose between their heritage and their medical careers. Thomas stood and moved to the council chamber doors. Mr. Caldwell, he called out, please join us. Dr. Mitchell has a counter-proposal for your consideration. Caldwell entered with his associates, their expressions skeptical and impatient. Dr. Mitchell, you have 15 minutes before we're required to execute the injunction. What possible counter-proposal could change the legal realities here? Sarah took a deep breath. I'm proposing that instead of revoking my medical license for participating in Cherokee healing, we establish a formal partnership between Cherokee traditional healers and licensed medical practitioners. A pilot program that could revolutionize healthcare for indigenous communities. Absolutely not, Caldwell replied immediately. The state cannot endorse unscientific healing practices, even if those practices have been proven effective over centuries of use, even if modern medical research confirms their therapeutic value. Sarah held up Catherine's journal. This contains documentation of Cherokee healing techniques that are now standard medical treatments, plants that became pharmaceuticals, diagnostic methods that became medical procedures, therapeutic approaches that are taught in medical schools. Agnes stepped forward. Mr. Caldwell, my great-niece, documented everything she taught Dr. Mitchell's grandfather. Every plant medicine, every therapeutic technique, every healing ceremony that he later published as his own research. This journal proves that Cherokee knowledge has been the foundation of modern medical practice for decades. Stolen foundation, Rose added pointedly. Caldwell's younger associate whispered urgently in his ear before speaking up. Sir, if this documentation is legitimate, it could create significant legal liability for medical institutions that have profited from undocumented indigenous knowledge. What are you suggesting, Dr. Mitchell? Caldwell asked warily. A legal settlement that benefits everyone. The Cherokee Nation agrees not to pursue claims for stolen intellectual property in exchange for formal recognition of Cherokee healing practices as legitimate medical treatments. I maintain my medical license while accepting Cherokee adoption, establishing precedent for other indigenous healers. And Cherokee children like Emma Rodriguez get access to both traditional healing and modern medical treatment. Thomas smiled broadly. Dr. Mitchell is offering to become a bridge between 2 worlds of healing, just as Catherine Swimmer dreamed. And what guarantees do we have that this won't just be a publicity stunt that ends badly for everyone involved? Caldwell demanded. Results, Sarah replied simply. Emma Rodriguez gets the treatment she needs, combining Cherokee spiritual healing with experimental medical therapy. If she recovers, and I believe she will, it proves that indigenous knowledge and modern medicine work better together than apart. Marie Walkingstick stood up, still holding sleeping Ayanna. Mr. Caldwell, are you really going to prevent the healing of a 7-year-old Cherokee girl because you're afraid of what success might mean for your legal system? For the first time since entering the chamber, Caldwell looked uncertain. The precedent this would set, it could fundamentally change medical licensing requirements across the country. Yes, Anna Firekiller said firmly, it could force the medical establishment to acknowledge that healing wisdom exists in many forms, not just the ones taught in American medical schools. Agnes moved to stand beside Sarah. Mr. Caldwell, my people have been healing for thousands of years. We have knowledge about plants, about the human spirit, about the connections between physical and emotional health that your medical schools are just beginning to understand. Dr. Mitchell is offering to help bridge that gap. And if this pilot program fails, if traditional healing proves ineffective or dangerous, then we'll evaluate the results honestly and adjust accordingly, Sarah replied. But if it succeeds, if Cherokee children get better health care by combining traditional and modern approaches, then you'll have helped create a model that could benefit indigenous communities across the country. Caldwell conferred quietly with his associates for several minutes before turning back to the group. This would require approval from multiple state agencies, medical licensing boards, probably federal oversight. But it's possible, Thomas asked. It's unprecedented. But given the potential legal exposure from undocumented use of indigenous knowledge, it might be preferable to protracted litigation. Caldwell looked directly at Sarah. Dr. Mitchell, you understand that you'd be gambling your entire medical career on the success of this program. I'm betting my career on the idea that healing is bigger than any one medical tradition. Sarah replied, on the belief that Cherokee wisdom and Western medicine together can save lives that neither could save alone. Anna Firekiller struck her staff against the floor. Then let us proceed with the Moon Law adoption. Dr. Mitchell, are you ready to become Ayana's spiritual mother and Emma's advocate under Cherokee law? Sarah looked around the council chamber one final time, at the sacred fire that had burned throughout this long night, at the Cherokee elders who had shared their most precious knowledge with her, at the community that was offering to make her a family, at the sleeping child who had changed her life simply by needing to be saved. I'm ready, she said. The adoption ceremony was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Traditional Cherokee songs filled the chamber as the 7 elders performed rituals that bound her to Ayana, to the Cherokee community, and to healing traditions that stretched back centuries. When Anna Firekiller placed the ceremonial adoption necklace around Sarah's neck, she felt something fundamental shift inside her, not just legal status, but spiritual connection to something larger than herself. As dawn broke over the Cherokee mountains, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, now also Ayana's spiritual mother under Moon Law, stood on the council building steps with her new family around her. In her pocket was a signed agreement establishing the pilot program for combined Cherokee and Western medical practice. In her hands was Catherine Swimmer's journal, soon to be submitted as evidence in the legal case that would change Indigenous healthcare forever. But most importantly, in her heart was the certainty that she had found her true calling, not just as a surgeon who fixed individual problems, but as a healer who could bridge worlds, honor ancient wisdom, and ensure that Cherokee children like Emma and Ayana received all the healing power that both traditional knowledge and modern medicine could provide. 3 months later, Sarah sat in a Boston hospital room watching Emma Rodriguez, now Emma Rodriguez Swimmer in honor of her Cherokee heritage, play with a new doll. The experimental treatment had worked even better than expected, possibly enhanced by Cherokee healing ceremonies that had supported her body's ability to accept the new therapy. Ayana sat beside Emma on the hospital bed, the 2 girls chattering. In a mixture of English and the Cherokee words Ayana had been teaching her new spiritual sister. Their laughter filled the room with a music that Sarah had never heard in all her years of practicing medicine. The sound of healing that encompassed not just physical recovery, but cultural restoration and spiritual wholeness. Outside the window, the Boston skyline stretched toward a horizon that no longer seemed like a boundary, but like an invitation to discover what other bridges might be built between different ways of understanding what it meant to heal. Sarah had lost her old life, but found something far more precious, a purpose that honored both her medical training and her spiritual calling, a family that transcended blood and embraced choice. and the deep satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the most important rescues are the ones that save not just individual lives, but entire ways of understanding what it means to be human. The Cherokee had a saying, "The river always finds its way to the sea." Sarah Mitchell had finally found her way home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.